we're going to have cleaner elections in Kentucky, thanks to Judicial Watch. The state of Kentucky, or the Commonwealth of Kentucky, has notified Judicial Watch that it has begun a mailing, or it actually mailed up to 250,000 inactive voters. These are people who have not voted, and they're checking to make sure that they're still eligible to vote. And if these folks don't respond, they will be removed from the voting rolls. Now, why did Kentucky do this mailing? Because Judicial Watch sued. And Judicial Watch's lawsuit resulted in a consent judgment wherein Kentucky agreed to do the necessary steps that federal law requires to clean up the voting rolls. And let me give you a little background on the law at issue here. It's called the National Voter Registration Act, and it's popularly known as the Motor Voter Bill. And it was passed and signed into law during the Clinton, I think it was the Clinton administration. And the objection from conservatives was that you're going to register everyone to vote, but it's going to lead to more voter fraud and voter registration issues and dirtier election rolls. So the so-called compromise was that the states concurrently would also be required to take reasonable steps to clean up the election rolls. So guess what the left did once the law was passed? They enforced to the hilt the voter registration requirement, meaning that people are able to gain access to voter registration, encouraged to register to vote at the DMV, hence the motor voter nature of the name, and then welfare, where public services are offered anywhere. And so the left had big pushes to get people registered to vote, which isn't necessarily wrong, unless, of course, they're being registered in a way that leads to voter fraud, meaning double registrations, and we're registering in more than one name and things like that. That's why that other element of the law needed to be enforced, but the left did not want to enforce that. In fact, during the Obama administration, it was never enforced at all, because the radicals running the Justice Department at the time had zero interest in doing it. And I think during the Bush administration, there were only a few cases even then. So Judicial Watch to the rescue. We began filing private lawsuits, because the law allows private causes of action, against Indiana and Ohio. I think it was back in 2012, 2013. That led to good results there. Ohio agreed, settled the case, agreed to take a key step to clean up its rolls. Indiana changed its law, so we were happy and ended the lawsuit there. Of course, the left was furious that we were successful, and they tried to sue to stop Ohio from daring to mail people who haven't voted, asking if they were still around, and then only removing them if they didn't vote for 2 federal election cycles. And the Supreme Court upheld our settlement last year. So following up on that are lawsuits against California. And Kentucky ended up with results that is going to significantly cut back the number of inactive names on the rolls. And what do I mean by that? Well, we've done a national analysis, and we're going to probably update it again this year with the new registration and voter data from the 2018 elections. But prior to that, we had done an analysis and found there were 3.5 million names on the rolls that were extra nationally. In California alone, Los Angeles County, it looks like there was 1.6 million extra names on the rolls. California hasn't removed a name from the rolls more or less in 20 years. And after that big Supreme Court victory, they agreed to settle the case with Judicial Watch and her other client, or clients, I should say. And LA County has begun the process of removing up to 1.6 million names from the rolls. So that's 3.5 million minus potentially 1.6 million. So we're almost cutting it in half with that one county mailing and process. And in Kentucky, again, we have that consent decree. Now, the consent decree was, or I should say consent judgment, was last year. And this is the problem. They had a Secretary of State who was elected, I think, in 2012. And one of the reasons Kentucky was a disaster, they had several counties where they had more people on the rolls than were eligible to vote. That's a pretty good indication we weren't taking basic steps to clean up the rolls. And the person elected, Secretary of State Grimes, in 2012, essentially just because of the leftist antagonism to the law, stopped cleaning up the rolls in Kentucky. So it was a big mess when Judicial Watch stepped in. But we did get the consent judgment, and actually the Justice Department under President Trump, one of the few good things it did on this area, they intervened. So they were on our side for a change. So Kentucky said no mas, and they agreed to the consent judgment. And this is what the consent judgment says. The practices currently in place in Kentucky do not comply with the MVRA's requirement that states conduct a general voter registration list maintenance program that makes a reasonable effort to remove ineligible persons from the rolls due to a change in residence outside the jurisdiction. So they sent 250,000 names, this notice that I'm talking about, back in, I think it was in June. That's 7% of Kentucky's voters' rolls. And by the way, that's about half of what they ultimately probably need to do. So there's probably going to be another 250,000 or so they mail. So we had 1.6 million plus 250,000, that's 1.85 million. Now, not all those names will be removed, and it will take time to remove all those names, 2 election cycles potentially. Certain names will be removed immediately if they're doing their jobs. But the process has begun. So it's 3.5 million minus 1.85 million. We've cut the problem almost in half. And it was Judicial Watch that did it, not Congress, not the Justice Department. Well, the Justice Department helped a little bit in Kentucky. California, they were nowhere to be found. So this is a major development. So why is it important that the election rolls be clean? Because dirty election rolls can mean dirty elections. Because when you have names on the rolls who have not voted, or moved away, become inactive, or the people are dead, that's a pool of voters that those who want to vote illegally can dip into. So that's why you need clean election rolls. So this is a big victory for election integrity, these efforts that Judicial Watch is undertaking.